to the Me, Myself and Hopefully You podcast. My name is Tariq and I have no idea what I want to do with my life. So after COVID ruined my first year at university, I decided to start a podcast where I interview guests from all around the world and hear more about their stories. And hopefully by learning more about them, I can learn a bit more about myself too. So if you're clueless about your career prospects, you want to get some advice from some amazing people who've lived some crazy lives, or you're just looking for a podcast without a load of ads in the middle, then you're in the right place. And so make sure you subscribe and follow us on Spotify so you don't miss out on future episodes. Ladies and gentlemen, this week I sit with a UN Goodwill Ambassador and the founder and chair of Climate Action Society, a non-profit organisation at the front line of student action towards making huge strides for environmental causes. Due to her work with CAS, my guest this week has been an advisor to the House of Lords and the UK government, created over 1,000 jobs in the UK and so much more, all whilst only being 23 years old. Absolutely mental. How does she do it? Well, you'll find that out as well in this week's episode. We also discuss her childhood growing up in Pakistan and the Middle East, why she's so passionate about climate change, her drastically different approach to tackling global warming compared to Extinction Rebellion, for example, Pakistani politics, and so much more. I've been waiting a year to get my guest this week on the podcast. So without further ado, my guest at this time, it is Aliza Ayaz. So Aliza, I want to start off with just asking you to introduce yourself a little. What do you do? And just tell us a bit more about yourself.
Sure. My name is Aliza Ayaz. I am 23 years old. Ethnically, I'm from Pakistan, but I've grown up across the Middle East in Dubai, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, with my university education in the last 5-6 years in London. So I'm someone who's very interested in health and environment. And my overall passion is to help with positive social impact.
Awesome. So let's start from the beginning then. You grew up in Karachi, I believe. What was that like and what was your experience there? And how do you feel like that's impacted the work that you're doing right now?
Mm-hmm. So I was in Karachi for high school only, and that was my best experience in really understanding the disparity in more developed countries versus not so developed countries. And it was everywhere I traveled and everywhere I lived. And the reason we moved around so much was because my dad is an architect, and every time he got a new project, we moved around. So it was, around the Middle East. We were in Karachi, we were in Riyadh, we were in Abu Dhabi, Dubai. And I could very clearly see the differences in people's education, in health, the kind of schools that were available. My mom is a doctor, so, the kind of people that would come and what kind of healthcare they had access to, what they could afford. Was it asthma that they were dealing with, or was it cancer? The kind of houses my dad was building. So there were clear differences almost spread out geographically. And I thought that while I was in Karachi for high school, it almost burst my bubble, because I realized, there's so many more people from outside our social circle and outside from almost a class that we would be categorized as. And it's not enough to just know that they exist, but actually you have to understand and almost try to live it so you can best help them. As a kid, I think we have had a very strong conscience where our parents have inculcated in us to think about others more than us and to spend our lives for the betterment of others' lives, because as long as we've got what we need. And I always thought, thankfully, with all gratefulness and gratitude to God, we've got all the basic necessities in life and way more. I've got an incredible privilege to be educated in the best schools across the world and the best university across the world. And so I thought, what is it that I could do to make use of my skill and simultaneously help someone around me or the environment? And so when I met people in Pakistan that were so loving, so warm, people on the streets, people in the shops, people outside the cities, in Karachi, it's very much like London and Dubai. It's no different, because you've got the nice restaurants, the nice shops. But as soon as you start driving outside, it's a completely different lifestyle. People are living in shacks in small villages. They haven't got enough water. They haven't got access to shops. Children are not going to schools. And so when I was part of these charity drives and I saw this, I was like, whoa, what am I doing with my life, and what more can I do? And so I think the best thing about being in Karachi was that it burst my bubble. And I think another angle to that was I went to a really good school there. And the people that I was surrounded with, I'm talking about students and staff both, were so intellectually stimulated. Everyone was ambitious, they had really good interests, they were active people. Unlike book education, which if you went to any school in anywhere across the world, you are at risk of being educated in a system whereby you're just receiving the knowledge, you're going to tuition and you're taking an exam. But to what extent are you developing your all-roundedness and your extracurriculars? To what extent are you trying out new things like acting and golfing and horse riding? And while I was in Karachi, I was able to do that. So I think that positive influence and that positive ambitiousness, if that's a word, almost got me going and my creative juices flowing.
So what do you feel like? I know you mentioned there about in Karachi you were learning with people who wanted to learn beyond just the textbook. What do you feel like was different about the people that you were surrounded, not just in sort of in Karachi, but then going all over the world? What were sort of some of the similarities and what were sort of the differences depending on which country you're going? So for example, when you were studying in Karachi, then when you were studying in somewhere in the Middle East, and then obviously you ended up going to UCL. What were some of the similarities and differences in terms of who you're studying around and the education system in all those countries?
Mm-hmm. I think the similarity was definitely that people were more aware because of access to the internet, because their parents went to good institutions, because they worked good jobs. And they had better social circles and professional circles. And so they knew that, okay, with this degree, I can get this job, or there is this degree and this course. And so automatically, when you know what opportunities exist in the world and that you can actually access the education or the skills or the network, the internships to get you there, then it becomes easy. And so I think there was a similarity in the self-awareness that people had. And it's not to say that it just comes with privilege. There can be lots of privileged people across the world, but if they're not actually aware of the journey that they need to embark on to get out of the comfort zone and push for things to help improve themselves intellectually, emotionally, mentally, to help be more resilient, to work in a professional environment, then really there's no transition. But I think there was a big similarity in the people I met at my high school at KGS, Karachi Grammar School, and at UCL, University College London. That self-awareness does a lot for you personally and for a group. And, I think anyone who's friends with me is someone who I would say is self-aware. And I like that. I like, you can always judge someone's personality almost by the company that they keep. And I am so lucky to surround myself with people that do just that. In terms of the difference between people in Karachi versus anywhere else I've been, I think there was a group of course, very motivated and ambitious students, but there was also a group of people with a lot of self-doubt and not as much as awareness of where they could get. And, there's obvious barriers like the finances. Where am I going to get the finances to go study here and there? Cultural barriers like, am I going to be allowed to go study as a young girl outside and abroad? Can I do this? Is it respectable to be in this profession and not in that profession? And so, of course, that exists still to this day and age in countries like Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, anywhere else really. You never know. So of course you don't see that as much in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or in London. So I think those similarities and dissimilarities almost balance themselves out in creating very unique individuals and people that I've come across with. And my social circle is quite diverse in the sense that, it's not just people from different ethnic backgrounds, but people who have been living in different countries, have very different interests. I'm friends with people who are absolutely obsessed and are geniuses in the finance world. I'm not a big fan of that side of professionalism, because it's almost like it's too capitalist, and it's personally not for me. But I have delved into that through internships and my work in McKinsey. And on the other hand, you've got healthcare, you've got fashion, classics, art, movies, whatever it is that you can think of.
Yeah, that's what I was actually going to ask before you touched on it about sort of obviously Pakistan is very conservative country. My parents are from Bangladesh, so I can understand where that sort of what it's like, and
Yeah.
especially for a girl as well, where sort of women's rights aren't as sort of good as they are in Western countries. What's that been like for yourself? Have you received any backlash from maybe extended family members of going, or because you've done a lot, you've been a UN Goodwill Ambassador, you've been on the 30 under 30 for Pakistan Daily, your face is quite prominent now. Have you received any backlash from that, and how have you dealt with that?
It's a good question, Tara, because it gives me a lot to think about in my journey, and thankfully, across the past just 3-4 years, I've come a long way, and the kind of achievements I've had also have changed. From just getting my achievements would be getting a 98% in X test, and change to bigger things like getting the climate emergency passed at the UK Parliament, which is pretty big. And so there was a lot of recognition, a lot of interviews, a lot of publicity. Initially, when I was in high school in Karachi, of course, no one really knew what I was going to become, or what would happen. And there was never really any reservation about what field I would go into. I am lucky to have been part of a family, an extended family, whereby there are really no reservations about what areas I can work in as a young single woman, what's respectable and not so respectable. And it was just very open, very communicative, and I think the biggest credit is to my parents. And if there was anything of that sort, I almost never heard it, but I'm pretty sure, and I'm very close with my extended family, that's never been the case. And undoubtedly, with that recognition and that fame, there is a downside to it. And it's almost like you're too public out there. There can be issues to do with privacy and security, especially in a country like Pakistan. And I've had to cancel my trip to Pakistan once because some people found out where I was living, what hotel I was at, and as a young single woman, it can be really dangerous, and you never know what people's intentions are. You do get a lot of people trying to headhunt you, and that's almost always a good thing, except if it could be politically influenced. And so, as much as I would love to be involved in Pakistani politics and be a leader for the people or do something, I know that it's also quite dangerous. It could be very sticky. There could be all kinds of dilemmas. And I personally, from someone who's very interested in politics, but I wouldn't feel comfortable entering it. I wouldn't feel confident in practicing it just because of the privacy and security concerns. And it also comes with a connotation of, oh, this person is exactly what you see on the media, on the interviews in the magazines. And actually, no, that's just a facet of my personality and what you'll hear in an interview, and that would be one story or something about my work. But if you meet me in real life or my social side, it could have a very different story or just something completely different. And so if we've got people, and this could be strangers, friends or family, people I meet for the first time, I always meet people who are like, oh, I saw this article and I thought you would be like this, but you're like that. Or, they would just, when they would approach me, the basis of that friendship or that relinking of that communication would only be because of my skills and the work that I do, and not because they want to be friends with me. It can be a bit upsetting, but I think it comes to anyone who has achieved something. Those are some little negatives to do with my journey. Luckily been very blessed with a very supportive extended family, and I think a lot of it has got to do with just my own two parents, my dad and my mom, who've been a rock through everything. And I think it's very easy to get sucked into almost a narrative if you're in a culturally dependent country like Pakistan, that people are saying XYZ is not respectable, so your daughter shouldn't do it. And so my parents weren't influenced by that, if that did occur. So yeah, very glad to have them.
I can completely relate to that. Yeah, like as in, especially coming from a very traditional sort of family, and coming from a very even though I've always lived in England, coming from a very small town as well, where there's sort of a pretty big sort of Asian population. I can completely get the whole, or what will X and Y and Z think and whatever. Even myself moving out to university was a huge thing. So, oh, well, what will people say? And I don't care what people say. But hopefully, but I'm glad to hear that sort of your parents were always you never had to sort of face that from at least from your own parents. You we spoke there about sort of Pakistani politics a lot. You mentioned there. Or would you completely rule out going into Pakistani politics? Would you prefer to go into British politics? What's your position on that?
So I have been involved in politics in both countries. And I've been part of the Parliamentary Youth Council in Pakistan, which obviously does not have much autonomy in making decisions, but you do all the same work. You're working on policy, you're working with politicians, you're meeting them. And I will completely rule it out now. Unfortunately, I think I was definitely one of those kids that growing up in school would be like, oh, I'd love to be the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and I would love to go work in politics there. I think if I did work in a role there, it would be less political and more administrative and more, to do with research and not as public. I think my role right now with the UN, for example, or my own business and my family office is very public. And so if I'd said something controversial, something that was not liked by someone else, or, I'm not doing things that are socially acceptable, things that are not liked by X and X person who's quite influential, it can get into trouble or some kind of heat. And you can imagine how intense that is in real politics almost, and to the extent that it's a danger to your life. So I do not want to get involved in that. And I certainly don't want to be a puppet for politicians who are not interested in healthcare and environment. It's definitely not on the agenda of all the politicians there so far, except Imran Khan. So I wouldn't feel too comfortable being there unless it's on a project basis, something of that sort. But at the same time, I would love to live in Pakistan long term. I think it's such a beautiful country with so much to offer to my future kids.
So much potential as well.
And so much potential, correct. So I haven't ruled that out, and I would go to Pakistan and live there any day in a heartbeat. In terms of British politics, I think politics more or less is the same everywhere. There's corruption everywhere. The people who can mislead, they can say false things, they can be quite blatant. It's tough to be a young woman and to be surrounded with politicians who are strong men that are older and can get away with things. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. Also, you don't want to have to combat with people who don't necessarily care about the agendas that you have on board. Of course, things are changing, and I could name so many different female leaders who are making things happen and moving forward with this. And I also think that just ruling that out and not being involved is not the answer. And I wish I could be a solution more so than I am already. But I think I am involved with politics in both areas already to a certain extent, and I think I would maintain that limit for as long as I can.
Yeah. So, well, let's talk about sort of the political involvement that you've had. So you mentioned earlier about how having that sort of experience of being in so many different countries, it allowed you to see sort of some of the socio-political issues that your everyday person was sort of facing. So how did you start? How did you start about going about trying to make an impact and trying to have some sort of positive impact on people's lives?
Yeah. I think my first step into politics was inadvertently through the research I was doing for the UN. I was a 16-year-old, and I wrote together a research proposal, which ended up being accepted by the United Nations Development Program. It ended up being published and being made into a bigger project. And so to implement it in Karachi, Pakistan, while I was in high school, I had to work with the local politicians and local leaders. And then through our family connections, which, our family is quite well connected and well known in Karachi. So it was just one thing after another. We met quite influential people in the political sphere. And, I was doing the work that an intern would do. But, as an intern, while you're behind the scenes, you notice a lot of things that you wouldn't normally be able to notice as a third party. So being in that office gave me a big telescopic view into how things really happen. It's a lot of meetings, it's a lot of negotiation, it's a lot of bribery, it's a lot of favors. And I will say this, even in the Mall United Nations debating that we do and the negotiations you have to do to draft a resolution, there is manipulativeness, there is coercion, there is that strong veto power. So it's almost inevitable, without these things like giving someone a favor or being a bit biased, and not it doesn't work like that. It exists everywhere. And it would be nice to say that you can be all clean and a saint and go through everything. And that doesn't necessarily make you a bad person if you did that in debates. But of course, if you did that all the time as a political leader, that says something about you. And so that involvement led me to be part of the Youth Parliamentary Council. There were elections from every local area, and I got elected. It wasn't that strong of a campaign. I didn't really think that I could win it, but it turned out really well, all the recognition that I was receiving and the work I was doing more than anything else. People were looking at the campaigns that I'd launched in schools in Karachi and then in schools internationally while just being a student in Karachi. And so they were quite impactful. In British politics, my involvement was the first time I did take a more obvious approach was when we wanted to declare a climate emergency at the UK Parliament. And so we had to work with the Labour Party directly under Jeremy Corbyn. And so we became part of the Labour Party Youth Council and helped look at different negotiations there. I think it's not too hard to enter politics, really, especially not in the UK and not in Pakistan if you know someone.
Got connections.
It's all connections, but in the UK you can enter no matter what your background is. So of course there's that disparity, but I wouldn't say it's particularly appealing to me. It never was, and I just don't see what the fascination with it is. I think if you wanted to be a change to make it happen, of course politics is where when you establish a rule, it happens, but that's not the only way. Actually, politicians rely on researchers, on the public councils, on the public sector, the private sector, to make things happen. That's where the data comes from. And so you can be a part of the solution in any way, in any magnitude.
What's that been like? Just because you started off, at 16, all of a sudden you were, working with the UN. I've got here that you were the youngest girl that was nominated. That was House of Lords nominee. Like I said earlier, 30 under 30 in Pakistan Daily, I believe. Like all of this sort of exposure that you're getting at a very young age, and you're doing a lot of good work. How are you feeling at that time? And was it ever quite overwhelming?
Well, I absolutely loved it in the beginning because it was like, wow, I must be doing something right and people are liking it. And it's so important to receive that support as a young person, as someone in school or university, because you're always worried about, like, amongst such a big world with enormous potential and such intelligent people, big organizations, am I ever going to be as important, or am I ever going to matter? Am I ever going to make an impact? And so I needed it like anyone else does. When you go to your supervisor with your dissertation draft and you look for his approval, that's exactly what I was looking for. I was hoping that someone would look at my work and be like, oh, amazing. This is what we needed, that there was a problem and you were part of the solution. And so it was wonderful to see that. But over time, I think across 2-3 years, it did get quite overwhelming because it was almost like, I became a personality for sustainable fashion. I became an example for young women, for young female leaders. I was often the only person of color or the youngest person in every panel I've been the youngest person, and I must have done about 160 different panels across the past 45 years. I've done lots of interviews. I now have a wonderful team that actually manages, to what extent am I going public? What are my media engagements? And I can't stop them because you have to be a public person. You have to be engaging with people, the youth, with politicians, with corporates, with everyone to actually to make things happen, to implement the agendas in the campaign that we have, because those people are my clients and those people are actually the people that are driving climate action or any other campaign that I'm running. And so I think that public facet of my work and the need to be in the front, the headliner for every campaign that we have, can get really overwhelming because, well, number one, it's taxing on your time and your energy, and how much you have to keep repeating yourselves, or you have to be open-minded. It's not because people don't understand, it's also because there's so many different people and so many different groups that you have to keep speaking to and repeating the message, which is fine, but as one person, it is a lot to handle. And the second thing is, of course, when you are recognized for something and almost looked up to as an example, you start getting questions about your personal life, your private life. There are articles about it. People will pry, and there'll be assumptions about the kind of work that you do, or when people meet you, they'll start grilling you. Okay, what about this and that? And sometimes when I'm meeting people outside of my work, I just want to be social and I want to be a normal person. I don't want to talk about X climate campaign and X achievement, and I don't want to have to answer their technical questions about, oh, what do you think about this latest development in this industry? And so, of course, it's not to say that people don't understand, but I think there is a certain expectation where people can be less compassionate and have high expectations of you all the time.
Yeah, it's almost like you've got a target on your head, and they're like trying they're trying to grill you. But like, yeah, but what about this about climate change? And what about this? Yeah, but you do this, and it's like I don't have all the answers. As someone who was very sort of politically engaged in secondary school, and I was very passionate about a particular political ideology, I was always, people would just come up to me and be like, yeah, but what about this? What about this? Like, I don't have all the answers. I'm just suggesting this is one possible answer, and that maybe we should look into it. I'm not saying I have all the answers, so I can get you problem on a much smaller scale, but I can definitely understand.
Or you'll get people who will try to be like, it'll almost be like a competition, but we know this. Did you know about this? About this? And I'll just be like, I know about this, so I'm just not going to participate in the conversation and let you do the talking. And often in moments like this, Tariq, I found that the best thing to do is just to be quiet and to observe. And you'll find me in person to be quite reserved. I think I almost have this social media butterfly personality, which I have to me, but I think with this increasing recognition and publicity, I found it easier to be that quiet person in the room, to be reserved, and to only really participate when people will actually listen to you rather than cut you out or almost judge you for what you're doing, for the things that you're meant to do. And it's and I think as a young person, especially, you're very prone to receiving constructive criticism, which is uninvited all the time by older people, because they'll be like, oh, this is just a young person, but
you're naive,
what are you actually doing? And, just because they're older than me, they'll start having all these conversations, and I find it a bit uncomfortable when it happens in family as well. So I think it's best to just keep work very separate from my private life.
I think you've got to always take, you're doing some amazing work, but you've got to sort of take a break from it, take a break from all the sort of maybe the depressing statistics that you probably read about or whatever, and be like, what, I just want to sit down and enjoy a cup of coffee and like watch some Netflix or something. It was interesting when I was sort of doing sort of looking you up on the internet. I found about how you set up the Climate Action Society at UCL. And the reason why I found that interesting is because the reason why you set that up is because you felt like universities weren't doing enough in terms for climate change. Now that completely contrasts sort of my experience when I started university in 2021. I'm at the University of Reading, and the University of Reading, whilst we were applying, and even if you just walk around on campus, there's so much about what the university does for climate change, and like making sure that energy sources are all renewable, etc., not investing in fossil fuel companies and whatever. Can you tell me more about what it was like sort of in 2018? What were universities just not talking about it? Was it a situation where a lot of the universities were investing in fossil fuel companies? And what made you want to go, you know what, I'm going to set up a climate action society in first year as well, which is mental. I wouldn't have started a society in first year, and really do something about it. What was it about climate change that really got you passionate?
Well, firstly, I'm so glad to hear that, Tariq, when you came into uni, you had a very different experience. And I think we have a lot to do with that. We actually did collaborate with the University of Reading as well and spoke to them about their climate policy. I was a fresher in 2017 and I was in my freshers fair. I always tell everyone the story because I think it's so important and it's so random. Uh, and at any university freshers fair, you would know you've got so many different stalls from different societies. It could be coffee society, chess society, sports society, um, and whatnot. And I was going through all the stalls, really enjoying them, sign up for all the most random things. Um, and I just noticed that, oh, there's nothing to do with sustainability or climate change. And I read the news a lot. I was always interested in politics. I was always looking at the newspaper. I was always interested in science and geography. I did that for my A levels, and so I was well aware of what how big the problem climate change was and what the solutions could be. I'd done that research paper in high school when I was 16, so it was just on top of my head. But it wasn't. It was not a passion. It was just something that I was thinking about amongst many other things that I was thinking about as a fresher. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, there's a clear gap. I'm going to investigate what's actually happening at UCL. And I noticed that there was no work being done around climate policy. Students were not engaged. The only thing that was being done was by a group called Fossil Free. Um, and they'd existed for 7 years up to 2017, and they still hadn't managed anything. And that's not because they couldn't manage anything. I mean, they'd done a lot from their perspective, and it was passive aggressive. It was things like locking the provost in his room and forcing him to try to make some changes. It was things like protesting and blocking out the way to the university door. And I realized, okay, this approach is not working. We need to be diplomatic. We need to be on the same table. We need to tell these people, board of directors and chancellors, that we are your friends and we're going to help you move towards climate action. We'll make this easy for you. I had this idea. I'm very organized about my approach and I'm very thorough with my approach. I always do my research and I'm comprehensive. And so everything that I've achieved so far, it's come with hours and hours and hours, and sometimes even months and years of research and analysis and teamwork, talking to lots of people. So I ended up crafting an 8-page research proposal after speaking to people at UCL and elsewhere. And this was a proposal of what the student club would do with an ambition that I had in my heart to make it an international NGO. I had a big vision. I always have big visions for things. And I'm glad I have that element of a visionary personality, which I get from my parents again, to make sure that things don't stop at what they're just meant to be, but actually always look for the room for growth and how it can help in X and Y and Z. And so when I started the society, I was thinking, we're not just helping the environment, we're not just growing more plants, but actually we're going to change all the buildings at UCL, then we're going to change all the buildings at all the universities in London and across the UK and tell them that you can rechange your electricity systems, you can move on to solar panels. If solar panels are not viable, you can have geothermal supplies, or you can move off from national grid. And I'm also going to tap into fashion in every industry. I'm going to speak to H&M, I'm going to speak to Zara, I'm going to speak to student fashion clubs at different universities. I'm going to motivate them to have clothes swapping activities. I'm going to motivate them to have sustainable fashion shows. I thought about climate change and health as well. I did conferences that were collaboration between Edinburgh, UCL, Oxbridge, whatnot, universities from across the UK to talk about the climate change effects on health, mental and physical health. And the same with finance, the same with law, the same with film. How do you capture that in film and in arts and poems and classics? And so because I had this approach of diversity and inclusion, I think it brought on the potential to grow into something big. Sorry, should I repeat that because of that tone?
No, I got it. Yeah, it's fine. No, don't worry. Getting pinged. You're a popular person. I can't help that.
Sorry. So yeah, when that came about and that society was an idea, I knew that I was down and motivated and so determined to make sure that it was a success. And I'm telling you that even if that proposal of a student club would have been rejected, I would have made a company on my own, an NGO of my own separately. I was not going to back that. I was not going to accept no for an answer. I knew there was a problem and I was going to do something about it because I knew that the skills I was gaining from my university, the people that I was surrounded with. I mean, at Freshers Fair alone, I met such intelligent people, Tarek, university students now have got so much potential. They're so self-aware. They know more about crypto and about technology and climate change more than some of the biggest professors in the sphere. And so I thought, we could be a collaborative team and we're going to make this happen. And so all of this came under the passion of positive impact, of the passion of making my parents proud, the passion of doing something good for the world. So my passion is not just climate change, it's just to be something else beyond myself.
I think that's why you're so it's very easy to support your vision, Aliza, because of your passion for positive impact. No one's going to say they don't want to be part of positive impact. You know what I mean? Because of your approach to wanting to see climate action, because it's diplomatic, because we see on the news, about the sort of approach that Extinction Rebellion take and sort of the controversy that can pop up. And oftentimes, at least I feel like rather than getting people on board, what it does is it pushes people away. What are your thoughts on sort of the Extinction Rebellion method of doing things, of standing in the middle of streets, stopping ambulances from getting through? And do you feel like it's effective?
I don't think it's effective, Tariq. I think that's the simple answer. And I have collaborated with Extinction Rebellion, with Insulate with Insulate UK, with a bunch of different organizations, all of which have different approaches. And there's things that I can approve of and things that I'm not so happy with. But overall, I think Climate Action Society as an NGO and as a company has a very separate vision and agenda to Extinction Rebellion, for example. We would not want to create more problems to solve this one problem. I mean, blocking the roads and even a peaceful protest can be quite disruptive for society. And it's going to win media attention. Yes, it's going to win the attention of people that are being disrupted on the streets. But to what extent is it actually going to realize in putting pressure on those big companies, the big dogs behind screens and behind, layers and layers of staff members to actually make that happen? It's almost like a 50-50. It's either going to impact them to some extent or it's not going to impact them at all. And even if it's going to impact them within that, between 1 to 100, what priority is it going to be? And so I think it's better to actually win a meeting over with that big dog one-on-one and make it happen. And almost just thinking about, to what extent am I going to be able to achieve something with this company or this politician or this agenda? Where is the diplomacy in this? Where is the collaboration, and where do two people meet on agendas that can be quite controversial? Because we have to be very honest with ourselves as well when we are asking people of something. When I'm asking the government to work more on climate action, do I realize how difficult it is for the government to do so in the midst of COVID, in the midst of an aging population, in the midst of inflation? Is it realistic? And if it's not, then I need to tone down my approach and help them see what they could do alongside. It can be quite pressuring almost when you work with so many different companies and you're such a public figure. I'm always meeting people left, right, and center who will try to, influence me to join their party or support their cause. And I have to be very careful about what exactly it is that I'm supporting or what element I'm supporting. And that's not to say I disapprove or disagree completely, but just I do want to maintain the vision and the identity that I created for the Climate Action Society, for CAS as we call it, and always maintain that we are here to work with people for the people. We can name a lot of enemies, but that's not going to help. That's just going to create more tension and more rivalry when it's not needed. All of what you just said there, I think that's what makes sort of Cass and yourself so easily joinable, I guess, like being able to align your values with theirs. Whereas unfortunately, the groups that do get more media attention, how many people have heard of CAS compared to, Extinction Rebellion, for example? Yeah. I feel like if more people had heard of CAS and what CAS's approach is, people will go, do you know what? This is actually quite good. It seems like they want to talk, they want to discuss, they're open to ideas. They're not just a group of young people that are naive or whatever, like the typical sort of the answer. And you'll get more people that go, okay, yeah, let's do something about climate change. I feel like a lot of people almost
or ignore climate change in a way to rebel against the actions of Extinction Rebellion. Almost like, well, if you're going to annoy us, we're just going to annoy you by not believing in it. And who's that helping at the end of the day? I don't think it is. And I think, I'm very excited to see sort of what CAS's future is and what you get up to. I hope you get into British politics. I feel like you'd be really good as someone who's traveled, who's got a lot of experience of multiple cultures. I think you'd be great in that space. You'd be definitely something that the country needs. How can sort of listeners potentially get involved with CAS and sort of work on this vision?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways to get involved with climate action or with one of my campaigns, which are spanning around education, around health, around fashion. So if any of these interest you, do get in touch with us. The best way to do so is to pop over an email to ucl.climateactionsociety@gmail.com or to my assistant Neema, Neema, @alizaayaz.com. We've also got public profiles on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, so you can always follow us and find out what's happening, what our campaigns are. And there's different ranges that you can get involved with. You can always be a behind the scenes person who's helping with an internship. You can be networking with people. You could be doing actual policy. You could be the face of a campaign. So we could use more help and support. And I hope that this has been encouraging for more and more members of the youth and people our age to realize that you matter and you can have so much impact when it can be so competitive. And it's almost like a rat race about who gets the best job out there, but there are so many other things that matter. And I also hope it's a message to older people doing different jobs and different experiences in different ages to not just give us a pat on the back or not to just grill us and almost question what we're doing, but actually appraise the hard work and the effort that goes into this behind the scenes.
Awesome. I've just got sort of a few sort of quick questions. Your assistant Neema, who without Neema this wouldn't have happened. So Neema, if you're listening, thank you very much. I'm sorry I've pestered you so much over the last 9 to 12 months trying to get Aliza to come on. She told me about your recent achievements in building a polyclinic in Pakistan, which will cater to potentially 2 million villagers. That's mental. That 2 million people's lives could potentially will be changed due to you raising £30,000. Tell me a bit more about that process and the impact that that's going to have.
Yeah, sure. So we had a very successful event in North England to fundraise for a polyclinic that we've had a vision of for a long time now. And when I say we, it's my family and I. And we've been my family office has been involved with philanthropy for ages now, for decades and decades. And as a kid growing up, I would always be inspired to say, I want to do something about this as well. And I want to fundraise, and fundraising is really tough, but, having done so many events, it's, I'm so blessed to say that, it's become easier and easier. And I have met so many people who are willing to give and understand the cause. And there's almost like a behavioral science to this fundraising journey. But anyway, the 30K that we've raised from one event will be combined with the other money that we've raised and the money that my family office will be contributing, plus some other donors that we've had support of to build this polyclinic. It's under the project called TPP, which stands for the Polyclinic Project. And so this will hopefully be the first of many clinics to come in areas where underprivileged people of underprivileged backgrounds could use the help, could access universal healthcare as you would in NHS, or anyone who has a little more money than others would be able to access. We have selected a potential site which will actually allow 2 million people to access polyclinic and access free healthcare. So that is a big number, and it always makes me so emotional because we spent a good few years, personally myself, visiting sites in person, speaking to people. And, just being so young and not even understanding almost the nuances of, which site is okay to have electricity supplies on, which site is okay to serve as many people in. And so I was working with surveyors, people in Pakistan, people in the UK, trying to better understand this. We finally came up with a site and collaborated with the Indian Network Hospital. It's in Punjab, just a few hours away from Muzaffarabad, where we will be helping 2 million people. And so these £30,000 is just one story out of the many successful stories to establish how a little bit of contribution and a little effort to fundraise amounts can actually make such a big change for some people.
It can, and that's because when I read 30,000 and then I read 2 million, I thought 30,000 will help 2 million people. That's crazy when you think about it. And obviously 30,000 for an average person is a lot of money, but if you can pool together a few people, £30,000 isn't actually all that. And it goes to show that if you get more people involved, you can raise even more money and help even more people. I would love to sort of ask you all the other questions that I've got, but obviously I know you've got to go. Hopefully we can do some sort of part 2 because it's been amazing talking to you. I've like I said earlier, I've wanted to sit down with you for a long time. I connected with you on LinkedIn. You were like one of the first people that I connected on LinkedIn with, because I was thinking this girl's so young and she's done so much. And then when I started the podcast, I was like, yep, definitely want to get Aliza Ayaz on the podcast. So thank you very much for coming on. I usually ask all my guests at the end what advice they'd give to their 20-year-old self, but obviously that was only a few years ago to you. So instead, I'm going to ask you a different question. What sort of legacy do you want to leave behind, Aliza? And what sort of legacy do you want to leave behind, and how do you want to be remembered by those around you?
I think my legacy, I hope, is going to be my work and not my name. And I don't really want people to remember my name, because I think death is inevitable, and we're all just going to be passing stories in this world, X and X person and X person. But what I want to leave is a legacy of the cause and the influence I've had, and whether it's the Polyclinic Project or the Climate Action Society or sustainable fashion shows, anything that could be potentially motivating and good for this world or the environment is something that I cherish very much. And this is why I work so hard, besides having a full-time job and besides being a full-time student. It's something that I pay really close attention to, and it's not possible without having a supportive network of friends and family who understand that you need to prioritize this sometimes, no matter how young. So I hope that is the legacy that I can leave.
Brilliant. I'm sure you will. And I can't wait to see what you get up to over many, many years to come. And hopefully British politics or Pakistani politics. I can't vote in Pakistani politics, but I'll be on Twitter screaming your name if you go into Pakistani politics.
That's really lovely, Tariq. Thank you for having me, and well done on having such an amazing podcast. I've listened to it a couple of times as well, so I was really eager to be here. Thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you very much. Hopefully we can do some sort of part 2 again. And I'll definitely try and get involved with Cass as well. I'll leave the obviously email links as well below so that anyone else can. I'm very excited to see what you get up to. And again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you very much. Have a great day as well, Aliza. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
And that is it for this week's episode of the Me, Myself and Hopefully You podcast. If you did enjoy, then make sure you hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and make sure you follow us on Spotify if you want to listen on the go. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great week. Until next time.